The Book of Remembrance of Moses, the Tablet of Gabriel, Chapter 11. A second view of the eruption of Sinai and of the Israelites going home. The tabernacle established in Shiloh and Mount Gerizim, dedicated to be the new Sinai. The account of the time of Israel at Beth Peor and of Moses' effort to reclaim those lost in Israel. The death of Moses and the decree of Eleazar concerning the 7 tribes of Israel, where those from Beth Peor would dwell. And it came to pass, after receiving all of this by Urim, that I thought we were finished with the account of the second flame. But as we approached to use the Urim again, the Spirit was saying that we were not done yet. And the scribes gathered once again, and after our usual prayer, I put the Urim upon the Thummim, and I began to see Kadesh Barnea, and I saw that more people had poured into the oasis overnight, and scores of people were sleeping on the ground everywhere, and the place was utterly filled with people out in the open, and I think they are cold. And the sun is just beginning to rise, and I am looking this time from a hilltop, just west of the oasis, eastward toward Sinai, and the huge mountain is silhouetted against the morning sunrise. And suddenly, in the sunrise, the mountain exploded, and it heaved itself off its base into every direction, and the sunrise was blotted out, and the mountain is about 3 days' journey away. And the eruption shook the earth, and all those sleeping were shaken, and they scrambled about to find their children, and some men went upon a hill to see, and the whole of the east became a cloud of darkness, and the men reported that Sinai was no more. And the people in Kadesh Barnea had departed the day before to come to the oasis, and many of them left in the night, and they knew that the Lord had led them to safety before the mountain was blown asunder. And they were aghast at the thought of what may have happened to the followers of Aaron, because the last they knew their encampment was over against Sinai, where Aaron had built and worshipped the golden calf. And the people of the covenant had been in the valley westward at the site of the tabernacle. And it came to pass that after a few days it could be seen that the whole green valley, where the tabernacle had stood behind a small hill, was buried deep in the earth under enormous amounts of debris. And the Lord buried his corrupted tabernacle, never to be seen again, because it had been desecrated with death, both on the altar with burnt offerings and sacrifices, and with the death of those who had done mischief there, with the evil gods of the nations, and the gardens and homes of the old order Midianites were no more. And Moses had come out during his recuperation to see the people as they had begun to arrive the day before, and his eldest daughter Agada, reference number 160, Strong's number 92, was attending to him, and her soul is joined to her father, and she carried his burdens with him, and their spirits cannot be separated. And it was plain to see that the people had even less provisions now than what they had when they had arrived from Egypt, for they had left in haste, being urged by the Spirit, and this time they were compelled to leave most of their possessions behind to escape with their lives. And it came to pass that Moses, Reuel, and Eleazar consulted together, and it was decided at that time to send out the scouts into Canaan, and it was about a 7-day journey to the regions around Bethel. And during the week that they awaited for their return, they sent out men to see if they could discover the welfare of their brethren that followed Aaron. And they prayed for them with much earnestness of heart, and many of them were members of their own families, and it was a bittersweet time, for it was joyous to be saved from the destruction, but it was grievous to be separated from loved ones and not know of their well-being. And the men were astonished at what they beheld at Sinai, and they could not get close, because of the many convulsions of the earth at that place. So they went far around to see if they could discover evidence of people departing northward toward Mount Hor. And indeed they found their trails, and they found the people in a place of water at Mount Hor. And the people there were bewildered and despondent and very shaken, and some of them were injured. And they told the men of Kadesh Barnea where they might look for Miriam and some others. And some youth went back with them to show them the place, and a few others wanted to go to Moses. But a strong man stepped in and forbade them. And he had taken over the leadership of the people, and his name was Kohath. Reference number 161. Number 6955, Allied Confederate. A descendant of Levi, and he was allied with the spirit of rebellion. But there were those who insisted on returning to see Moses, so the little company set out, and they found Miriam, and they made a litter and carried her body home to Moses, and it was a long way and very difficult. And Miriam was buried at Kadesh Barnea. Reference 162. Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. And it came to pass that upon hearing the report from the men who had journeyed into Canaan, that it was to be for them a land flowing with milk and honey, much excitement rippled through the people. And even though they slept in the open and had little to eat, they were a happy people, and for they were finally over and done with all the controversy concerning the covenant, and now they were going to get to go home. And they did not realize how much oppression they were under until they thought upon their blessings of now having the law and the covenant and the freedom to go to their long-awaited ancestral home. And the tender love of the Lord for them and their trials healed them and invigorated them into much thankfulness and praisings. And they were much relieved to find out that so many of their brethren had escaped the destruction going northward. And the sounds of life in the oasis gladdened the heart of Anokeesed, as their songs of going home arose up to him. How long his poor heart had awaited to hear it from the children of Jacob, his son of salvation. And it was plain to me upon seeing this that, with the joys of Anokeesed surrounding his covenant people, nothing whatsoever could impede them on their way home. And even the heathens, observing his people, could not help but marvel at the spirit that went with them. And it came to pass that Moses declined to go with them because he wanted a peaceful time to rest and be with his wife and family and with Raul. And Agudah would not leave her father, no matter how exciting it was to be going home, and she married in Kadesh Barnea. And her first 2 children were strong twin sons, and they were big, and their mother was little like her parents. And Agudah took charge of the watch care of her parents when all the other children of Moses departed to go into the land of Canaan. And it came to pass that all the troop of happy travelers departed on the main road to Beersheba, and they determined under the leadership of Eleazar and Joshua that they would travel openly on the main roads to go home, and they would be friendly and gracious to all they met, and they had no inclination to arm themselves. And they were absolutely destitute as to having provisions and possessions, and they formed a long line singing as they went, and they carefully tended to their young and old in the way. And word was sent ahead to Beersheba that a large band of immigrants who survived the destruction of Mount Jabal was coming their way, and they told them that they numbered perhaps about 700 or 800 souls, with both women and children, and including their old people. And with that mixture of company, the people of Beersheba began to ease their worries and have compassion on them, and they hastily gathered what they could to be gracious hosts for them, and they anticipated that the travelers would only stay the night and then move on. And when the Hebrews arrived, the people beheld them and felt their joyous spirit, and they were very surprised, for they had expected them to be downcast in their being destitute. And the people asked, "How do you fare? For we have little to share with you, but such as we have will be set before you." And Joshua told them that the adults had not eaten in 4 days, and that only the children had eaten. And the elders of Beersheba came together to speak of how they might come to the aid of the people, and they came to Eleazar and Joshua and said, "All we have beyond what you have already received from us is barley that we feed our goats. And the barley harvest is to begin tomorrow. If you will send some people to help with the barley harvest, they will earn a share, and perhaps you can trade it for food along your way." And Joshua said, "We will be glad to help with the harvest." And all the people of Israel were delighted to receive a share of the barley harvest, because that was the holy food they partook of when they entered into the covenant at Sinai. And barley was the meal of such as they had, when they covenanted with Raul to be good leaders of the people, and they knew just how to prepare barley cakes. And the people of Beersheba marveled at the happiness of the Hebrews, and at the zeal with which they labored in the harvest. And the women of Israel could be seen looking about on the hillsides to find rocks with which to grind the barley, and they were laughing and happy. And the youth would carry the stones down into their camp for them, and work them so they could be used to grind flour. And you will see that they took these stones with them into Shiloh, to be their first possessions in the Exodus, like their first mother had in Eden. And my heart spilled over with happy emotions to see these things, and the rocks of Beersheba, reference number 163, Beersheba number 884, the living well of the covenant, that were calling out for a Savior found their rest. And the women made barley cakes, reference number 164, barley number 8184 from number 8170. And barley cakes feel that whatever the Lord wants you to do, you are going to get it done, like as if to take it by storm. And the people there asked, "What is the meaning of your singing?" And the Hebrews replied, "They are songs of going home." And an old man said, as he viewed the Hebrews in poverty, yet being happy, and zealously laboring together with them in eating barley, "Surely these people are going to leave a mark upon the earth at their destination." And a saying went abroad from Beersheba that the tribe of the Shawarites, reference number 165, barley eaters, number 8184, roughness, from number 8176, to act as gatekeepers to split away, related to number 8175, will divide the earth and come to take away as a whirlwind. And it came to pass that much gratitude was shown by the Hebrews for the hospitality of the Beershebians. And I can certainly see how the people of the covenant acted in the character of Abraham and Jacob. And they arrived at Shiloh in the beginning of the springtime with some barley to spare for seed. And when they arrived, they began to immediately build houses and settle into their new home. And they cleared forests to plant their crops, and they were a very clean people, both temporally and spiritually, because they walked in the law faithfully, and even their children could recite the law, because they made a version of it for their youth and children. Reference number 166. See appendix for children's and youth's version of the law. And they sent men down to the Jordan to gather wild fruit and herbs that they might find along the way. And they picked green figs and put bitter herbs with them to make a meal. And only the poorest people will do it because of the harsh taste. But in Israel, they do it to this day. Now Eleazar and Joshua were friends from their youth, since they met in Egypt, and they stayed together all their lives. And Joshua was a helper for Eleazar in much the same way as Moses always had a helper in attendance before him. And it came to pass that after all were settled into their new homes, which they patterned after the manner of the houses of the homes of the old order Midianites in Kadesh Barnea, Eleazar and Joshua went upon the mountain by Shiloh, and Eleazar named the mountain Har Zeroah, reference number 167, number 2220, number 2022, which means the mountain set apart and reserved for a holy use, with the elements of righteousness. And they built an altar there, and all the people rejoiced, and they called it our new Sinai. And they said, "How can we live without a holy mountain?" And as time went by, because of jealousy, the Hebrews outside the covenant began to call it Mount Gerizim. Reference number 168, number 1630 from number 1629. See the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible by Martin Abegg, Jr., Peter Flint, Eugene Ulrich, page 201, for the original version of the book of Joshua, saying his altar was on Gerizim in Samaria. And that name means ground that is worthless. It needs to be cut off and abandoned. And this holy mountain in Samaria is the birthplace of the holy nation of Israel. And it came to pass that in the next year, after their crops were in and the lambs were born, Eleazar and Joshua, together with 4 strong young men, set out to visit Moses. And the people wanted him to come to Shiloh, and they traveled at a rapid pace to Kadesh Barnea, where he was. And when they arrived, they waited at the place of water. And Moses received word that they were there, and he immediately went out and embraced them with much joy and emotion. And the men wore righteous clothes and carried themselves with dignity. And at first sight Moses knew they were successful in establishing themselves in their homeland. And they ate together and talked into the night. And Eleazar recounted to his father all that transpired since they left. And Moses said, "The remains of Mount Sinai quieted down about the time they dedicated Har Zeroah to be their new Sinai. And they asked Moses to please come to Shiloh, and he declined and said, 'Zipporah and I, like the rest, we find here with her family. And the Lord has come to me and informed me that you, my son, are a man of the holy order for Anokeesed, and you are young and well suited to lead the people in the covenant of Abraham in their new nation. And Zipporah is not in the best of health, and I would not want her to travel away from her desert home into timbered hill country.' And Moses brought out the Hebrew treasure, and he placed the tablet of Gabriel in the outstretched left hand of Eleazar, face up. And Eleazar put his right hand on top of the tablet, and Moses put his hands over both hands of Eleazar, in much the same way as God did with Abraham. And Moses rehearsed from memory, word for word, the covenant that the mother of Abraham had laid down for him. And I do not know the words that Moses said, but I will quote again what Idah said to her son. 'Between our hands is the tablet of Gabriel, and I am bequeathing this treasure to you. And this tablet came here from Maween, and with it is the Urim of the son of Melchizedek, who is named Shireh. And I am trusting this treasure into your care as I prepare to depart from this earth. And I want to give you instructions regarding this sacred writing.' And Idah said, 'I myself do not know how to read this tablet, and I only know that it speaks of a sacred pathway back to Eden, and I want you to enter into a holy covenant with regards to it, because it has come now to be your responsibility, and it seems that the whole world of the Eerkodeshiy are expecting you to live by it and bring it forward to the next son of salvation. And when it comes time for you to choose the next son of salvation, I want to remind you that Methuselah established preference for the firstborn, and that practice must not pass along with this tablet, for such is not the will of Anokeesed, and who is born first is temporal. And for Anokeesed all things are spiritual. My firstborn went astray, and Enoch's firstborn went astray, and Yaatsekawd's firstborn went astray. And you are my son of my salvation, and you are not my firstborn, and you have not gone astray. And you are to see that this tablet only comes down to a son of salvation, and he shall be the one who must obtain this treasure. And this is your covenant. Your father detests you because you are a peaceable man and have a character of kindness. I would counsel you that as you move out across the land in gentle considerations with all people, you are not to take anything by force. Do not arm yourself or your fellows, for it is known that since our first parents first came out of Eden, there have been no weapons found among them that were used to inflict violence on any man. And do not have slaves, but hirelings only who are free to come and go, and do not oppress them in their wages, and make peace wherever you go, so that there are no disputes over wells of water or pastured lands or places to dwell. And walk gently and quietly upon the earth within the boundaries of that which is written upon this tablet, because on it is written the pathway of righteousness leading back to Eden. And you shall be the father of a multitude, and your example in all your loving kindness must be such that it can carry forward from generation to generation unto the ends of the earth. For from your seed Anokeesed shall find his blessing, and the character of your behavior will bless both heaven and earth. And you are a circle drawer, and you will have skill to bring rain, and to find water in the earth. And most of all, as you walk on the pathway back to Eden, the living water will follow out with you, and your ways of holy living will teach and affect the hearts of other peoples, and lead them to order their lives in peace. And many will come into the covenant, and the living water, who is Motsah the Lamb, is that which makes a way that does not wander from Anokeesed, but leads straight to him. And that which the Spirit instructs, you must obey, and you will remain clean. Our first father was a shepherd, and you will be much like him, because for a multitude you will be like their first father in their restored pathway. And thus Edah laid the covenant before her son, and after Moses finished rehearsing her words, Eleazar said, I will covenant this day to lead the people, to do all that the Lord has asked of us, as it is written upon this tablet, and according to your instructions to us. And these men knew that Shiloh was a safe place for the tablet to reside and for the urn to be kept. And Eleazar asked his father if he would write an account of all that transpired since he went into Egypt, and more importantly, write a testimony and the law for people in Shiloh. And Moses said he would write it, and Agudah said she would acquire the necessary things for her father to make the record. And they all knew that the only written language available for Moses was Egyptian. And it came to pass that Agudah procured sheets of brass and a stylus, so her father could write, and she traded with a master of a caravan who she knew, so that it would not be bought for money. And Moses labored diligently for many years, writing the book of the law. And Eleazar and the covenant people stood in great anticipation of someday receiving the book of the law. And during the ensuing years, no one would go near the remains of Sinai, because it continued to smoke and bubble up steam in places, and some of those who were lost were never found. And there was no report about Aaron, but it had come about that after a short time he died and was buried at Mount Hor, having never reached any part of his inheritance in the land of his ancient fathers. And upon my thinking once again about Aaron, the vision in the Urim changed, and I began to view those who had escaped the eruption moving northward toward Mount Hor, and the spirit of Semihazah went with them to bring contention and despair. And the people were weary and despondent at the prospect of following their leaders, to wander in the wilderness without a way, until they would be able to constitute an armed force to take the land. And they quickly found that their numbers of between 400 and 500 were too many for the wilderness to support them. So they split up into smaller groups according to their families, in the nomadic tradition of the Bedouins, and they would not venture out to travel on the established highways. And they could not agree between themselves as to a way forward as a people, and in this way they began to form separate identities in terms of their view of their purpose as a people, and they wandered from place to place in their small groups, and occasionally they would come upon one another, and they would share the news. And it came to pass that in the 10th year since they left Egypt, the largest of these groups, led by Kohath, settled in the valley of Beth Peor, intending to stay a short time, and the people of Beth Peor were friendly towards them, so they extended their stay there. In Beth Peor, reference number 169, number 6465, from number 6473, Beth Peor was also called Baal Peor. See number 1187. Was the house of Baal, and of the worship of Ashtoreth. And Kohath and his people did not know that the interest of the people in them was to find new daughters to use in their fornications of the worship of Ashtoreth and Baal. And Kohath and his men were willing to be drawn into their worship with them, and they were taught by the priests of Baal how to properly do burnt sacrifices and offerings in the pursuit of evil gains. And in a short time Kohath and the people with him began to prosper, and to feel good to no longer be wandering anymore. And during that year, word spread that Beth Peor was a haven for their people, and all the small groups were accumulated there by the end of that year. And the leader of the people of Beth Peor taught Kohath and his men how to make weapons of war, and their wives taught the women how to beautify themselves. And lastly, Asael was there, and he saw to it that the very people who had inherited the covenant of Abraham would be thoroughly taught how to effectively practice the worship of Baal and Ashtoreth. And this calamity would follow Israel throughout time to bring their continued destruction and enslavement, and the intention of Asael was to see to it that the Aaronites would someday overcome the people of the law of Jeshurun and the way back to Eden. And thus it can be seen what sorrows came to those who have rejected the covenant and who dismissed Moses, and now a part of the house of Israel was lost, to practice the ways of the heathen nations. And the people of Aaron practiced these ways during the ensuing years, and all knowledge of the law was forgotten by them. But you will see that in time the people of Aaron became no longer welcome in Beth Peor, for a plague of sickness arising from their many fornications had increased to threaten all the people there. And in the midst of all this, the Hebrews in Beth Peor began to divide their settlements into tribes, and most of them, after centuries in Egypt, did not know their tribe, so they selected their tribe by how they agreed with the positions of those representing their way forward, and the people were otherwise indistinguishable. And I saw that the people of Eleazar and Shiloh did not separate into tribes, because they could not bear to be separate from one another. And there were many of them who did not know their tribe, and many more of them were Midianites, or Egyptians, or the descendants of Ahah. And these came into the covenant to assist the house of Israel as they brought their vision as a holy nation into fruition. And the people of Shiloh spoke of how at the present time they considered that their holy nation consisted of 7 tribes of Israel. Reference number 170. See Joshua chapter 18, 1-6. Note 7 tribes. All living according to the law together in their associations. And this came about because of the last words of their father Jacob, which said that the tribes of Dan and Gad and Levi and Simeon would not be represented, and the people of Joseph declined and gave preference to Ephraim should they desire to take their place among the tribes of Israel. And it came to pass that word of this thinking came to those of Israel who were at Beth Peor. And I see in the that time is passing, and it is at this time 37 years since they left Egypt. And the Hebrew people at Beth Peor had all come to dwell in separate encampments according to their tribe in the valley. And they did this to lessen the contention among their people. And because tension was rising also with the people of Beth Peor, it was decided that they would send a delegation to Shiloh to speak to Eleazar and Joshua. And upon their arrival there, Eleazar met with them, along with those had been selected to judge among the people, according to the covenant that was made with Raul, and they sat and respectfully heard all the words of the delegation. And those from Beth Peor said, "Is there not room for the tribe of Levi in the land of Israel?" Reference number 171. See Joshua chapter 21, verse 1-2. Note, the Levites approached Eleazar, Joshua, and the council at Shiloh. And after careful consultations and inquiries unto the Lord, it was decided what their response would be. And Eleazar said, according to words of our own father Jacob, as he lay dying, the tribe of Levi shall have no inheritance in the land of Israel. Reference number 172. Joshua chapter 18, verse 7. But your inheritance is the sacrifices and burnt offerings that your fathers ate from off the altar at the tabernacle at Sinai. And such an act is the element of righteousness, to see to it that all the generations of the tribe of Levi shall not stand to officiate before an altar in Israel. But there is room for you in Israel on the lower slopes of the land, should the local people give you permission and be willing to integrate with you. And there are 4 cities that your people may not live in, where our leadership is located, and our holy days are carried out. They are Hebron, Salem, Bethel, and Shiloh. and we do these things in accordance with the instructions of our ancient father Jacob. Reference number 173. You will notice that the children of Aaron are spoken in conjunction with the Kohathites. Joshua chapter 21 verse 4. And the delegation rose up and left angry, and I know that in time the people in Beth Peor would come to dwell in Israel. And at first they complied with the words of the council with Eleazar. And importantly, it came to pass that word came to Moses concerning the request of the Levites at Beth Peor made to Eleazar and the 12, and his heart was filled with compassion for the people of Israel in Beth Peor. And Moses was now 87 years old, and Zipporah had passed away, and his daughter Agudah still tenderly attended to his needs, and 38 years had passed since they left Egypt. And all during that time Moses had diligently prepared his book of the law, according to the request of Eleazar, and Eleazar was very desirous to have a written account from his father of all the Lord had done with the people from that time, so the people of Shiloh may have a record of it written by his father's hand. And Moses sent word to Eleazar to come see him, and Eleazar and 4 of his companions who guarded him in the way accompanied him to Kadesh Barnea, and they were led by Joshua, and they arrived to see Moses. And after they greeted one another, and Agudah had prepared a meal, Moses said, My heart is broken for the children of Israel in Beth Peor, and the old-time inhabitants there are teaching them to worship idols and to practice abominable things for Baal and Ashtaroth, with sacrifices and burnt offerings and fornications, and such things bring sad disgrace upon the holy name of Anokeesed, our Ancient of Days. And I believe every effort must be made to reclaim them in their rightful inheritance in the covenant of Abraham and the ancient fathers. And Moses said, Will you please take me there? Perhaps we can recover them to be in the covenant. And Agudah said, Father, you must not go there. Remember, they tried to kill you. And Moses said, Be peaceful, my lovely daughter, because much time has gone by, and perhaps all such that so desired have passed away. And is it not so that the Lord will tend us in the way to preserve us in our efforts to bring redemption? And it came to pass that Agudah hearkened to the words of her father, and she procured a Bactrian camel. Reference number 174. Bactrians, camels with 2 humps, were and still are much rarer than the 1-humped dromedaries, from a passing caravan to carry him to Beth Peor. For it was feared he was too old to ride upon a dromedary. And Moses could not walk without assistance, and they made furniture to fit between the 2 humps of the Bactrian camel, which would hold him securely. And as the company was preparing for the journey, Eleazar espied his father secreting his book of the law in his belongings that were to be brought with them. And Eleazar said, Father, it seems to me that it is too dangerous to take the record with you, and should any mishap occur, the people of Shiloh would have no record of the doings of the Lord. And Moses said, My son, this record is not written for those at Shiloh. It is written as a testimony against those in Israel who have gone astray after strange gods, and who have broken the covenant since the beginning. And remember, all our people at Beth Peor entered into the covenant also with all their brethren, and you all responded to the same teaching, and the people of Shiloh keep the law, and the heart of Anokeesed ponders daily upon the lost the most, and not upon the found. And with this both Eleazar and his sister held their peace. And the company set out for Beth Peor, and they went north past the ruins of Sinai, and the compassion of Moses was enlarged as he passed the remains and remembered all that had occurred there with the presence of Anokeesed. And Moses traveled with the Spirit in attendance, and with determination and confidence, even in his old age. And the little troop camped at the edge of the northern end of the valley of Beth Peor, so they could come there discreetly. And Eleazar sent word that he desired for the Hebrews there to send a delegation to see his father. And it happened that the same ones came who had come to see Eleazar at Shiloh. And before they arrived, Moses put the book of the law in its wrappings within his reach. And when the delegation arrived, I saw that there were 4 of them again who were prominent, but this time there was a company of armed men with them, which seemed to number about 50. And the 4 men came into the tent of Moses, and they were sullen and serious, and they expected to be reproved and condemned by Moses. But Moses greeted them warmly, and laid out gifts before them of raisin cakes, dates, and pomegranates, and there were little bags of pistachios. And he was gracious towards them, and Moses rehearsed to them somewhat of the hardships their fathers went through in the Exodus. And he excused them and explained and said, "Our fathers had a hard time, and they did not intend to do all that transpired among them." And he rehearsed to them how great the compassion of Anokeesed is, and how kind his ability is to forgive. And he spoke of the grandeur of the inheritance of the covenant. And then he reached over and took hold of the book of the law, and it was written in Egyptian, because there was as yet no written language in Hebrew. And the delegation from Beth Peor was not surprised to see how the record was written. And it seemed to me that it was common for the people of the nations surrounding Egypt to read somewhat the Egyptian writing, and it was inscribed upon plates of brass with a stylus, and it was heavy, and looked to be about an inch thick. And the delegation was seated right before Moses on sheepskins facing him, and Moses handed it to the man sitting in the center, and he opened it up for a few sheets and passed it on. And when they all looked at the book of the law and handled it with their own hands, they gave it back to the man in the center, and he tossed it at the feet of Moses. And I saw the dust arise, and he said, "What have we to do with Egypt? We don't want to find a way to read it. We have our own religion." And the man was Kohath, and I know that at his last day, when he stands before Anokeesed to be judged, he will know that he had the book of the law in his own hands, and what was done with it will linger upon him forever, and who he allied himself with instead will never leave his memory. And the delegation arose and left, and it seemed to me that his armed men were disappointed that they did not get to use their weapons. And Eleazar picked up the book of the law, and he gave it to Joshua and said, "Carefully take this record home to our people and put it into the sacred things pertaining to the tabernacle." And Moses mourned, and in the night he could be heard singing a song of grief. And in those moments the Lord appeared to Moses, and his countenance lit up the tent. And he said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant, for you have delivered Israel. And now you have set your hand a second time to attempt to bring the wayward home, and I will always remember your example." And in the morning they found that Moses had passed away peacefully in the night. And they buried him there in Beth Peor, in the sides of the valley, and they did it in such a way that no one would ever know where he was buried, and only Agadah and Eleazar and their companions knew where it was. And they did not travel for 7 days in their mourning, and my heart went out for Agadah. She came with her father, carefully helping him on and off the Bactrian camel, and stopping often for him to rest along the way, and now she rode the camel home without him. But she knew the honor of her father was akin to their ancient father Abraham, and I could plainly see that she fulfilled her vision of created purpose. And Eleazar and Joshua with their men returned to Shiloh with the book of the law, and Eleazar and the people were ever faithful. And I began to see Eleazar after he returned, and I see him handling the book of the law, and the look on his face reminds me of the determined look Shem had as he first contemplated establishing Shabuah after the flood. And Eleazar repented before the Lord for not wanting his father to give the book of the law to the wayward, and he acknowledged in his heart that his father had written it to reprove the wayward in Israel. And this book of the law was the supreme act of compassion for those who had hated his father Moses, and he wept. And after that Eleazar made a plan, and he said aloud, "O Lord, forgive me, and I will walk more carefully in the steps of my father, and I know you will accept all that I shall do upon the holy place." And Eleazar began to prepare for the coming day of instruction, And he went upon Har Zaroah to his altar, and he prepared all the necessary elements of righteousness, and Joshua prepared the trumpeters. And the altar was blessed, and Shabuah was put into action. And each Sabbath for 50 days Eleazar called out and assembled all the Eerkodeshiy by the sound of a trump. And he instructed them and had them promise that in the due time of the Lord this book of the law would come again to the wayward in Israel, to call heaven and earth to witness that which would be done with it. And all the people at the altar ate barley cakes. And I know that his worship there with all heaven present will bring about the third and fourth flames of the lamp of Anokeesed, to shine forth for the pathway back to Eden. And his works of righteousness will have an eternal effect, and this book of the law will yet come to those who worship after the manner of those in Beth Peor, and it will call the lost to come home at the end of days. And now we see his prayers are answered with this book of remembrance of Moses. And thus ends the account of the second flame on the tablet of Gabriel. Amen. This concludes the book of remembrance of Moses, the tablet of Gabriel, chapter 11. Shalom, family.